At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. The last screw tightened with a satisfying final click. Javier Mendoza wiped a smear of grease from his thumb and held the ancient diagnostic pad up to the dim light of his workshop. The screen flickered, sputtered, and then bloomed into a steady amber glow, displaying a crisp schematic of a Gerber-class freighter. A faint smile touched his lips, another quiet victory in a life built from restoring the discarded. For 5 years, this was his penance. The anonymous hum of capacitors charging, the scent of heated polymers and soldering flux, the patient work of bringing dead things back to life. It was a world away from the existence he had buried, the one where he ended lives. Here, in the grimy, rain-slicked heart of Tetsugama's lower sectors, he was just a mechanic, cherishing his anonymity. He killed the overhead lamp, and the small shop fell into the city's perpetual twilight gloom. Outside, neon bled down the concrete canyons, painting the falling rain in shifting hues of magenta and electric blue. The downpour's rhythmic hiss provided the city's constant pulse. Javier pulled the heavy steel shutter down, its rattle and groan a familiar end-of-day chorus. He locked it, tested it, and turned to leave. The air changed. Pressure shift, a distortion in the city's ambient noise, a flicker at the edge of his perception. A familiar tension seized the muscles in his back. A feeling, dormant for half a decade, surged to life. A physical certainty as familiar as his own pulse. Reflex took over, a response drilled into him from a past life. He took one more casual step toward the alley's exit. His posture relaxed as he slid his hands into the pockets of his worn overalls. Then, he ducked. A silent lance of blinding white energy tore through the space where his head had just been an instant before. It struck the hardened alloy doorframe of his shop, and for a moment, the alley bleached to white. Then came a crack hiss that flash-boiled the rain, filling the air with scalding steam and the sharp scent of lightning striking stone. Javier was already moving, rolling behind a monolithic waste reclamation unit. He peered around the corner, scanning the narrow passage. It held only the downpour, the steam, and a patch of air across the street that shimmered, just for an instant, like heat haze off sun-baked asphalt. An active cloaking field, high-grade, military, or something far beyond it. To survive, he had to run, hide, then fight, in that order. He broke from cover, his boots slapping against the puddled alleyway. He sprinted deeper into the labyrinth of Tetsugama's underbelly. He sprinted through the warren of alleys, a network of pipes, conduits, and forgotten service corridors that snaked through the sector's foundations. The air was thick with the smells of synthetic noodles, stale synthel, and damp decay. Above, the sky became a mere suggestion, a sliver of bruised purple visible between the monolithic towers that scraped the clouds. A second plasma bolt shrieked past his ear, the air crackling with displaced energy. It slammed into a thick coolant pipe running along the wall, which erupted in a flash freeze of cryogenic gas. A dense, frigid fog filled the passage, obscuring all sight. Javier plunged into it, using the chaos as a shield. The heavy, rhythmic thud of a large bipedal form on the concrete vibrated through the soles of his boots. The creature was fast, agile for its size. Javier burst out of the fog and into a bustling night market. Lanterns cast a flickering warm light over stalls piled high with fish whose scales sheened like motor oil on wet asphalt, strange pulsating growths, and polished chrome prosthetics. The chatter of a dozen languages mingled with the sizzling of food on grills and the blare of a holographic advertisement for a new model of android. He shoved into the crowd, becoming another body in the flow. He glanced back. For an instant, the hunter appeared. A towering figure, at least 8 feet tall, momentarily decloaking as it navigated a tight corner. A clean form wrapped in a skin of matte black armor plates over what looked like synthetic muscle fiber. A surface that stayed matte black under the neon glare. It swiveled its smooth, elongated head on a multi-jointed neck, a single recessed optical sensor glowing a deep crimson. Powerful, jointed legs ended in metallic talons that scraped the concrete. A sleek weapon mounted on its shoulder tracked his position. A harrow. Javier had only heard stories, whispered rumors from his former life about a species of bio-augmented hunters, galactic legends used by the ultra-rich or the supremely powerful to eliminate heavily guarded targets, beings who had engineered their own biology to become the perfect weapon. It had seen him. Its head tilted, the single optic glowing brighter as it swept the crowd, calculating a firing vector. Javier grabbed the edge of a noodle vendor's cart, a flimsy thing of chrome and steaming vats. With a grunt, he heaved it. The cart crashed into the ground, sending boiling broth, noodles, and vegetables spilling across the pavement. People screamed and scattered. A thick cloud of steam erupted. A new veil. Javier had already vanished, ducking under the awning of a textile shop and vaulting over a stack of crates into the adjacent alley. He kicked open a steam grate, sending a pressurized geyser skyward, breaking his pursuer's line of sight. He scrambled up a rusted fire escape, the metal groaning under his weight, and kicked the ladder away behind him. He ran across rooftops slick with rain, the city's neon signs below a dizzying blur. The hunter kept pace. Its powerful legs propelled it from wall to wall, clearing wide gaps with powerful leaps. The harrow was relentless. Javier slid down a rain-slicked ventilation duct and landed hard on a walkway overlooking the maglev transit line. Below, a train was just beginning to pull away from the station, a sleek silver serpent accelerating into the night. It was his only chance. He took a running leap, clearing the 20-foot gap. He hit the train's roof hard, the impact resonating through his frame. He rolled, his overalls soaking up the grimy water, and scrambled for a handhold as the maglev picked up speed, plunging into a tunnel that cut through the city's core. The wind became a roaring gale, trying to tear him from his perch. Behind him, a massive shape landed on the last car's roof with a heavy metallic boom. The wind howled, a force that threatened to peel Javier from the maglev's hull. The train rocketed through the subterranean arteries of Tetsugama, the tunnel lights strobing past in a hypnotic, disorienting rhythm. He flattened himself against the cold metal, the train's vibrations buzzing through his entire body. He risked a glance backward. The harrow, Tusk, was advancing toward him, car by car. It moved low to the roof, a hunter's crouch, its talons finding purchase on the slick surface, advancing steadily against the wind. Javier needed to be smarter. He crawled forward, fighting the gale, his fingers numb and raw. Near the front of his car was a maintenance panel, its edges sealed with industrial-grade sealant. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket, a workshop habit that now might save his life, and jammed the pry bar end into the seam. The panel was stubborn. Rust and grime fused the screws. He put his entire body weight into it, his muscles burning with the effort. The wind tore at him. The tunnel's roar was deafening. Behind him, the harrow was approaching. Thump, thump, grew closer. With a screech of tortured metal, the panel's corner popped loose. Javier shoved his fingers into the gap and pulled with everything he had. The wind instantly snatched the panel, which disappeared into the tunnel's darkness behind them. He peered inside the exposed cavity. A dense nest of fiber optic lines and armored power cables pulsed with faint light. He had found the train's central nervous system. He spotted his target, a primary power conduit, thick as his wrist, running alongside a guidance control cluster. His goal was to create an electrical surge, using the conduit as his source. He found a thinner auxiliary power cable, pulled his tool again, and used the wire strip function to shear through its insulated casing, exposing the live wires within. Sparks flew, stinging his face. The harrow was now just a car away, and the scrape of its talons on metal a death knell. Javier took the stripped sparking cable and jammed it against the guidance control unit. A massive surge of electricity flooded the delicate system. The train shuddered, bucking as if it were a living creature. A high-pitched electrical scream tore through the air as circuit breakers blew and its guidance system failed. The magnetic field containing the train faltered for a microsecond. The entire vehicle lurched sideways, slamming against the tunnel wall with a deafening shriek of scraping metal. The lurch threw Javier against the open panel's lip, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Tusk, caught mid-stride, lost its footing. The violent motion sent the massive creature tumbling. It slid past Javier, its talons gouging deep furrows into the train's roof before the lurch threw it from the maglev into the tunnel's strobing darkness. The train's emergency brakes engaged, screeching as they fought against its momentum. It slowed, and as the vehicle emerged from the tunnel and pulled, lurching and sparking, into the next elevated station, he swung himself over the side, hung for a second, and dropped 20 feet to the platform below, landing in a roll that sent a shock of pain through his body. Alarms blared across the station. People were shouting, pointing at the damaged transport. He blended into the nascent panic, pulling up his hood and vanishing into the commercial district's crowds. He was free for the moment. He found his temporary refuge in Ichidori Market Square's sprawling, chaotic heart, the lower sector's nerve center, a multi-level explosion of commerce and humanity. Thousands of people moved through the space, a river of bodies flowing beneath holographic koi fish that swam through the humid air and colossal advertisements that promised digital nirvanas and genetic perfection. A deep bruise was already forming on his ribs where he had hit the train. Javier found a spot near a food stall selling skewers of sizzling, unidentifiable meat and leaned against a support pillar, forcing himself to control his breathing. He scanned the crowds, searching for a distortion, not a person. There, on the gantry high above the square, a vague outline resolved itself against a glowing sign of Refaden Core Gene Therapy. Tusk appeared. The creature's movements were stiff and held its left arm tight to its body. The harrow injected a glistening fluid from a wrist-mounted device into its own thigh, its massive frame tensing as the potent restorative agent went to work. Tusk was observing, its shoulder-mounted plasma caster panning across the crowd below, searching for him. Cold dread seized him. The predator raised its weapon. A tiny, bright red targeting dot appeared, dancing across the square. It swept past a group of children laughing, a pair of lovers holding hands, an old man feeding cybernetic pigeons. Javier watched the laser's path. A crucial detail emerged. The dot jumped from point to point, correcting itself, jumping past any civilians. His pursuer operated under a strict code, prioritizing the target above all else while avoiding collateral damage. A plasma bolt discharged in a crowded public square would be catastrophic. It would trigger a full-scale response from Tetsugama Corporate Security, the heavily armed private army that ruled the city. They would lock the sector down, deploy hunter-killer drones, and scrub the area with every sensor at their disposal. The harrow waited for a clean shot. He formed a desperate, dangerous idea. He was the prey, but he could dictate the hunt's terms by using the city's own bureaucracy as a shield. He pushed off the pillar and deliberately walked deeper into the market's most densely packed section. He kept his pace steady, weaving through families and tourists, always ensuring there was a buffer of innocent bodies between himself and the hunter's perch. He glanced up. The red laser followed him, flitting from person to person, failing to lock on. He had bought himself time, but the harrow was intelligent. It would adapt. He waited for its next move. A low subsonic hum vibrated through the market's floor plates. The frequency bypassed conscious thought, triggering a base-level fear response. People paused, looking around, a confused anxiety on their faces. Then Tusk escalated. Small discs on the gantries above, emitters he had previously overlooked, activated. They projected an intense, non-lethal sonic wave. People cried out, clutching their heads, compelled to flee from the unseen source of the pressure. Simultaneously, the fire suppression systems in the market ceiling hissed to life, releasing a thick, vision-obscuring chemical fog. The market square, once a vibrant hub of activity, devolved into a maelstrom of screaming, stampeding people, all blinded by the fog and driven by a manufactured terror. Tusk shattered the shield from within, turning it into a weapon. The stampede became a directed force. A subtle pressure on the crowd's flow told him Tusk was modulating the sonic emitters, creating walls of sound that guided the panic. Tusk was hurting him. The harrow was using the stampede to funnel him away from the crowded public spaces and toward the deserted industrial district on the sector's edge, a grim and desolate place. Javier fought against the tide of bodies trying to break free. A wall of people pressed him forward, crushing the air from his lungs. A child fell. He hooked an arm around the girl's waist, hoisting her up and shoving her into her mother's arms before the crowd swept him away. The crowd pushed him inexorably toward a single wide service corridor that led to the loading docks. He stumbled out of the crush of people and into the industrial zone's relative quiet, where the air was heavy with the smell of hot iron and industrial lubricants. The only sound were the panicked crowd's distant screams, heavy machinery's hum, and the rain's steady drumming. The fog swirled around him, visibly reduced to a few feet. He stopped running. Now he would fight. The loading dock was a cavern of concrete and steel filled with rows of massive cargo containers stacked 3 high. Rain fell through the gaps in the corroded ceiling, creating puddles on the grimy floor that reflected the cold blue glow from the yard's security lights. Tusk was in here with him, moving through the fog and shadows, its passage marked only by the shifting mist. He needed a trap. He assessed every detail, his mind drawing on years of survival in urban war zones. His assessment revealed it. A heavy 10-ton cargo container suspended from an overhead gantry crane, held in place by a powerful magnetic clamp. The control panel for the crane was on a nearby wall, but the panel was too far. Reaching it would expose him. He needed a remote trigger. He spotted a loose power conduit snaking across the floor, its insulation frayed. Nearby lay a discarded pressure plate from a faulty loading bay door, a simple, durable piece of tech. He formed a crude, effective plan. His fingers slick with rain and grease, he rerouted the live wires from the conduit. He connected one lead to the magnetic clamp's manual release circuit, a bypass he found by ripping the control panel's cover off. The other lead he wired directly into the pressure plate. He dragged the heavy plate and positioned it to the center of a narrow walkway between 2 stacks of containers, concealing it beneath a shallow puddle of water and debris. When enough weight pressed the plate, it would complete the connection, sending a massive electrical pulse to the mag clamp, releasing the container. He backed away, finding cover behind a different stack of containers. A frantic pulse beat against his ribs. He held a short, heavy length of rusted pipe in his hand, his weapon. He could only wait. He slowed his breathing and listened to the dock's sounds. The drip of water, the distant city hum, the wind whistling through the steel canyons. Then, a flicker of movement, a distortion in the fog at the walkway's far end. Tusk emerged from the gloom, its strides long and purposeful. It swiveled its head, scanning the area with integrated sensors. The Harrow was tracking Javier's heat signature, his scent, the disturbance his presence made in the air. Javier held his breath. Tusk stepped onto the walkway, its massive metallic foot heading for the puddle concealing the pressure plate. The Harrow paused, tilting its head, sensing something wrong. Javier had to act. He hefted the pipe and threw it with all his might against the far wall of the container. The pipe clanged, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Distracted, Tusk snapped its head toward the sound. In that instant, it took one step forward. Its foot came down squarely on the pressure plate. A loud snap of electricity, followed by the mag clamp's shriek as it disengaged. For a heartbeat, the 10-ton container hung in the air, and then it fell. The Harrow reacted with a speed that blurred its form, throwing itself backward. The motion saved it from a direct hit, but the falling container's corners still caught it, slamming into its shoulder and leg with immense force. The impact threw it against the adjacent container-stacked steel wall. The cargo container crashed to the ground with an earth-shaking boom that shook the entire dock. Javier peered from behind his cover. The Harrow was pulling itself to its feet, a low guttural growl emanating from its throat. Viscous, nearly black blood, thick as oil, oozed from a deep wound in its shoulder. Its leg buckled as it put weight on it. The impact had also damaged the technology woven into its skin. Its cloaking field sparked and failed, revealing its form, the light-bending effect flickering erratically like a broken monitor. The shockwave from the container's impact had thrown him backward, cracking his head hard against the concrete. The edges of his vision blurred. The Harrow turned his head, its single crimson optic locking onto his position. He had to move. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pulsing pain in his skull and the sharp agony in his ribs, and fled once more into the city's labyrinth. A sharp, insistent pain matched the frantic pulse in his veins. Javier limped through the neon-drenched streets, each step sending a jolt of agony up his side where he suspected At least one rib had cracked. His head throbbed, and the world seemed to tilt away with every movement. He needed help, and that meant finding Sona. He ducked into a darkened data kiosk, the kind used for anonymous secure public network access. The terminal flickered to life, bathing his face in a cold blue light. He typed across the holographic keypad, his hands shaking from adrenaline and pain. Their protocol was simple and secure. He accessed a dead-drop server hidden deep in the city's network, navigated to a specific encrypted file, a monthly shipping manifest for a defunct medical supply company, and altered a single character in the document's hexadecimal code. A 4 became a C. The change was their signal. The signal meant a critical injury, compromise, and that he was heading for the clinic. Sona needed time to prepare. He scrubbed the terminal's cache and slipped back out into the rain, pulling the collar of his overalls up to hide his face. The clinic was on the sector's other side, a journey for a wounded man hunted by a creature that could smell his blood on the wind. He stayed in the shadows, moving through service tunnels and over rooftops, the city's endless rain washing the blood from his trail, while the searing pain in his side burned unabated. Every flicker of light, every unexpected sound, sent a fresh shock of adrenaline through him. The entrance to Sona Vasilik's clinic was a graffiti-covered maintenance hatch in the back of a 24-hour synth protein dispensary. The air smelled of rancid grease and disinfectant. Javier keyed in the access code and the hatch slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing a steep metal staircase descending into darkness. He stumbled down the steps and into the clinic's sterile white light. The clinic was a small, functional space carved out of the city's sublevels. Trays of polished surgical tools lay next to repurposed diagnostic scanners. A single operating table dominated the room's center. Sona was there, waiting for him. She was a woman in her late 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a stained medical coat over a simple jumpsuit. She cataloged his injuries with a glance, and her expression hardened. "Javier," she said, her voice a clipped, direct rasp. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," he grunted, leaning heavily against the wall. "On the table, now." She moved directly to the examination. As Javier hauled himself onto the operating table, she was already at work. A diagnostic wand hummed over his body, its findings appearing on a floating monitor beside her. 2 cracked ribs, severe concussion, and a laceration in your side that needs more than a patch. What in God's name hit you? "Something big," Javier managed, hissing as he probed the gash in his side. "Figures." She moved with an economy honed by a lifetime of trauma surgery. She loaded a hypo spray with a powerful coagulant and injected it directly into the wound. The bleeding slowed. "I'm gonna have to suture this deep." "Do it," he said through a tight jaw. As she worked, her needle slid through his skin, her stitches even and tight. She asked the question. "Who is it, Javi? One of your old employers?" "Doubtful," he said in a strained voice. "It's something else, something alien." Sona paused, her needle hovering over his skin. She looked at him, her gaze intense. "Tell me." He described the creature, its size, its speed, its cloaking film, the plasma caster. He told her the creature was a harrow. Sona's face became ashen beneath the harsh clinical lights. Decades in Tetsugama's underbelly had shown her the results of every advanced and illegal weapon on the market. But Javier described something beyond any of them. "A harrow," she whispered, the name sounding like a curse. "I've heard the stories, legends. Predators hired for astronomical sums to hunt targets beyond anyone else's reach. They have a reputation for finality." She resumed her stitching, her movements faster now, more urgent. "Javier, whatever you did in your past life, it's followed you here. This thing, it's so far beyond any enforcer I've ever seen. How can you fight it?" "I have to," Javier said, his voice low and steady despite the pain. Running failed. She tied off the final suture and applied a bioceramic sealant that hissed as it bonded with his skin. "Then what are you going to do?" "Alter the terms," he said, pushing himself into a sitting position, his body protesting the movement. I've been the prey. Now, I've become the hunter. Sona just looked at him, fear and a deep, weary sadness in her expression. You've almost buried that man you used to be, Javier. Are you sure you want to bring him back? High above, perched on the Takeda Core Tower's antenna-bristled spire, Tusk watched the city. The rain slicked its armored hide, running in rivulets down its damaged shoulder. Pain was a dull, persistent throb. It had injected its leg with a fast-acting restorative agent from its medkit, but the torn muscle tissue still protested. It perceived the city with more than its eyes. It cycled its vision modes through the electromagnetic spectrum, but deep shielding buried in the sector's concrete and rebar protected the clinic, blocking thermal and electrical signatures, so it listened. It deployed a high-gain audio sensor, a device the size of its thumb. It unfurled into a delicate mesh dish that focused on the district below. It filtered out the city's cacophony, the traffic, the advertisements, the rain, the 10,000 conversations, and isolated the clinic's shielded ventilation system's specific frequency range. Through it found the faint sounds from within. The human's ragged breathing reached it, and it analyzed the rhythm and depth to gauge the extent of his lung trauma. The metallic click of surgical tools. The woman's voice, clipped and professional. It cross-referenced her medical terminology with its extensive databanks on human physiology. Coagulant, suture, cracked ribs. It released a dust mote sensor from its gauntlet. The microscopic device rode the thermal updraft from the street into the clinic's shielded exhaust vent, sampling the air for chemical traces. The report was immediate, beamed directly to its implants. A complex synthetic coagulant with a unique molecular marker. It now had its signature locked. The prey was more damaged than it had anticipated. Good. Tusk activated its comm unit, a bioorganic device integrated into its wrist gauntlet. A stream of encrypted guttural clicks and hisses transmitted to its unseen employers. The message was concise. Target located. Location confirmed. Wounded but aided by local asset. The prey is resourceful. The hunt continues. Respectfully difficult. We'll claim trophy before the sector's next dawn. It cut the transmission. Its analysis was complete. The prey lay wounded and cornered. The woman, Sona, was a complication, but a minor one. It settled into a patient, watchful stillness. A predator, waiting for its injured quarry to bolt from its den. This human was a unique quarry. It thought, it planned, it fought back. This was a worthy hunt. The trophy would be all the more valuable for the struggle required to obtain it. Javier pushed himself off the operating table, his movements stiff. The coagulants and painkillers Sona had given him had taken the edge off the pain, but a profound exhaustion settled deep in his bones. Staying was a death sentence. The clinic was a sanctuary, but it would become a tomb if the Harrow breached it. He's out there, isn't he? Sona asked, cleaning her instruments. Watching. He is, Javier confirmed. It knows I'm here. It knows I'm injured. It's waiting for me to make a mistake. So what's the plan? Feign a trap? Javier said, pulling on a clean, dark undershirt she had provided. I need to get into a place where its technology becomes a liability. He looked at the worn mechanic's jacket he had arrived in. An idea formed. He went to her medical supplies and found a small disposable thermal pack for treating muscle strains. He activated it, and the small pouch radiated a steady, human-like warmth. He slipped the pack into the inside pocket of his jacket. It's been tracking my heat signature, Javier explained. Let's give it one to follow. He handed the garment to Sona. There's a service drone depot 3 blocks east of here. It runs automated delivery routes into the stacks. I need you to put this jacket on one of the drones heading deep inside. Sona's eyes widened as she understood. The stacks were a notorious vertical slum, a district of hastily constructed interconnected tenements built one atop the other, reaching hundreds of stories into the smog-choked sky. A place of perpetual darkness, narrow corridors, and few sight lines. A nightmare for any pursuer. "That's clever, Heavy," she admitted. "He'll send it on a ghost chase." "Oh, he'll buy me time," he corrected. "That's all I need." "Sona, go." She cut him off, her voice firm. "Just survive this. My clinic has a terrible monthly survival rate as it is." He gave her a rare, faint smile. Then he turned and headed for a secondary exit, a tunnel that led into the city's sewer system. A pain shot through his side, a reminder from his cracked ribs. For a second, the world tilted, a wave of dizziness from the concussion. He braced a hand against the wall, took a steadying breath, and pushed the feeling down. He left, clad in a dark thermal undershirt that would radiate far less heat. The bait was set. Tusk saw the heat signature emerge in the clinic's hidden exit. It moved with a limp, the posture consistent with the injuries it had assessed. The thermal image was clear, even through the driving rain. It was the prey. The figure moved through the back alley, sticking to the shadows. The figure was heading east. Tusk followed from the rooftops, a shadowy wraith. The human was clever, using the city's infrastructure to mask his movements, yet a heat signature was a beacon in the cold, wet night. The target reached the automated drone depot. It paused, then tossed a bundle onto a departing service drone just as it lifted off. The machine zipped away, joining a river of air traffic heading towards the stack's oppressive, chaotic silhouette. The human shape then ducked back in the alley and disappeared. Tusk analyzed the situation. A drone was now carrying the primary heat source. The prey had shed its outer layer to reduce its signature and was likely trying to double back. The Harrow saw through the deception. It had other ways of finding its quarry. It leaped from the building, landing in the alley with a soft impact. It would follow the heat signature. The human was wounded. Sending his only source of warmth away meant he was heading for another shelter nearby. Following the drone would lead it through the general area of the human's intended escape route. Tusk would patrol the route, its multispectral sensors scanning for the fainter secondary traces the human would leave behind. It bounded onto the rooftops again, keeping pace with the service drone. It entered the stacks, a vertical maze that swallowed light and sound. The drone navigated the narrow canyon-like corridors between the tenements. Tusk followed, leaping from rusted balcony to makeshift bridge, its sensors peeled for any sign of its true prey. Meanwhile, Javier, shivering in the cold rain, moved in the opposite direction. He was a ghost in the machine now, his body temperature almost masked by the ambient cold. He moved swiftly, his destination clear in his mind. He was heading for the district's old power distribution substation, a relic from a century ago, but one that was still operational and, more importantly, a place that flooded the entire area with a storm of electromagnetic interference, a place where Tusk's advanced sensors would be useless. The chain-link fence surrounding the substation was old and rusted, but the danger high-voltage signs were still legible beneath layers of grime and graffiti. Javier found a section weakened by decay and tore it open, the metal groaning in protest. He slipped inside. The air in the substation hummed, a deep thrum that vibrated through his jaw. Towering transformers, behemoths of copper and steel, stood like silent gods in the rain, their ceramic insulators glistening. Arcs of static electricity danced between exposed terminals, lighting the yard in brief, brilliant flashes of blue-white light. The electromagnetic field here was a chaotic storm, a wall of noise that would scramble any sophisticated sensor array. He found shelter from the rain beneath the overhang of a massive capacitor bank. For the first time in hours, he had a moment where he could just breathe. The pain at his side was a dull, constant fire. Exhaustion settled in his limbs like lead. His strength was failing. Running and hiding had only gotten him this far. Sona was right. A battle of attrition would favor the hero. He had to become the hunter. He closed his eyes, and the life before flooded his memory. The one before the quiet workshop, the cold calculation of a long-range shot, the brutal intimacy of close-quarters combat, the chilling calm of planning an assassination, turning a city into a weapon, an environment into a tomb. A monster of a different kind, a human hero. That was what he had been. He had buried that part of himself for 5 years. Now, he needed it. Winning required a different approach. He had to choose the battlefield, creating a place where the hero's strength became a weakness, where technology failed, reducing the fight to primal violence. A place of chaos and environmental hazards, a place that would level the odds. His mind sifted through the industrial district's geography. He found it. The old black iron foundry, down by the polluted Tetsugama River. Decommissioned for years, it stood as a skeletal ruin of rust and decay, an area of intense residual heat from the cooling forges which would wreak havoc on thermal vision. A location of screaming metal and constant percussive noise from the wind whistling through its broken shell would confuse acoustic sensors. An environment where the torrential rain, channeled by the collapsed roof, would turn every surface into a treacherous, slick hazard. He had a plan. He would invite the hero to set the stage for the final confrontation. A cold certainty settled over him. To protect the man who fixed broken electronics, the killer inside him had to emerge one last time. Tusk tore the thermal pack from the jacket, crushing the warm pouch in its fist. Deception. Tusk stood on a precarious balcony deep within the stacks, the service drone hovering nearby, its mission complete. The heat signature was a fake. The human was long gone. It felt annoyance and a grudging respect. The prey was resourceful, a strategist who had anticipated its methods and exploited them. This was a fellow predator. Tusk recalibrated its entire approach. It discarded thermal imaging as a primary tool. The human ran cold, and the city was a labyrinth of false heat signatures. It switched its sensors to their highest chemical analysis setting. The method was slower and more painstaking, but far more accurate. Its quarry was now a scent instead of a heat source. It widened its sensor field, sampling the airborne particulates, filtering out the trillions of background data points of the city's pollution. It searched for a unique chemical marker. It found it. Faint, but present. The unique non-organic diagnostic markers present in the high-grade medical coagulant the woman had used. The compound, a proprietary product of a local biotech firm, had a signature as distinct as a fingerprint. It had the scent. The rain had washed the trail thin, but the trail remained. A ghostly path leading away from the clinic in the opposite direction of the stacks. Tusk let out a short, sharp hiss. The game had just become interesting. The prey was clever, but the hunter could smell the prey's blood on the wind. Javier found what he was looking for. A city maintenance console, its screen cracked but still functional, tucked away in a service tunnel beneath the substation. He pried open the access panel. Corporate infrastructure always had legacy back doors, diagnostic ports left by the original builders for maintenance crews. He found the port by touch, his knowledge of municipal systems returning to him. He typed on the holographic interface. He created a domino effect, hacking a chain reaction of systems. He'd set up a chain reaction power failure, instructing the substation to overload a series of secondary grids throughout the industrial district. The system's fail-safe protocols failed him. He bypassed them one by one, creating logic loops and false reports that would disguise the shutdown's intentional nature. He programmed the final command on a timer. In 1 hour, a controlled rolling blackout would plunge the entire industrial district, including the black iron foundry, into darkness. Emergency lights would flicker on, but the main power, the systems that ran everything from security sensors to automated machinery, would be dead. His work done, he exited the tunnel. It was time to send the invitation. He took one of the blood-soaked bandages Sona had used to patch him up and dropped it in the center of a clean, open plaza. It was a flag, planted in the ground. "I'm here. Come and find me." He turned toward the river, his limp more pronounced, his body a canvas of pain. His flight from the hunter was over. He was walking toward the arena he had chosen. The black iron foundry rose in the Tetsugama River's banks, like the corpse of some colossal prehistoric beast. Its smokestack stood like shattered teeth against the bruised purple sky. A torrential rain fell, heavier here by the river, drumming a chaotic, deafening rhythm on the sheets of rusted metal that still clung to the foundry's skeletal frame. Javier slipped through the outer wall's collapsed section. Inside, the foundry was a cavern of shadows and decay. Massive, silent machines, presses, smelters, conveyor belts, stood like ancient statues, draped in rust and cobwebs. The air was thick with the smell of rain, rust, and old soot. The residual heat from the colossal forges, which had been cooling for years, radiated from the floor, creating a disorienting, shimmering haze that made the air writhe. The rain and ambient heat would interfere with Tusk's thermal vision and cloaking technology. The storm's constant echoing noise would mask the sound of his own movements. Every surface was slick with water and old grime, a treacherous landscape that favored agility and balance over raw power. He climbed a gantry that overlooked the main foundry floor, finding a position near the primary forge, a vast circular maw that descended into the earth. He found a long steel pry bar and kept it close. He waited, letting the rain's rhythm wash over him, becoming part of the foundry's sounds. A shape materialized at the foundry's far end, striding out of the rain and shadows. Tusk. Its damaged cloaking device sparkled and fizzled in the downpour, casting strobing, erratic light on its hulking form before felling. It stood revealed, its matte black armored plates glistening in the gloom. Its single optic scanned the cavern, assessing the environment. It registered the heat haze, felt the floor's slickness, heard the deafening noise. It recognized the setup. This was a deliberate choice, an arena. With a slow, deliberate movement, Tusk reached up to its shoulder and unslung its plasma caster. It placed the advanced weapon on a dry patch of floor, a gesture of grim respect. It let out a sharp, guttural cry, a challenge. Javier stepped out from the gantry's shadows, the steel pry bar held in his hands. He met the Harrow's optic. Words were unnecessary. They circled each other on the cavernous, rain-drenched floor, two warriors in a forgotten cathedral of industry, preparing for the final confrontation. The city, the past, the reasons for the hunt, all of it faded. Only the rain, the rust, and the fight remained. Tusk lunged, closing the distance, its talons extended, aiming to gut Javier in a single devastating strike. Javier spun away from the attack, using the slick floor to his advantage, sliding from the charge's path. He swung the pry bar in a low arc, aiming for the Harrow's injured leg. Tusk was quick. It pivoted. The bar hissed through the air where its leg had been. It countered with a backhand swipe aimed at Javier's head. Javier ducked under it, the wind from the blow rustling his hair. He leveraged the environment. He scrambled up a pile of rusted steel beams, forcing the larger creature to follow. When Tusk lunged, Javier kicked a loose beam, sending it clattering down. The Harrow dodged, giving Javier a precious second to reposition. He used hanging chains to swing from one gantry to another, a ghost in the machinery. He led Tusk across narrow, treacherous catwalks where its size and weight were a disadvantage. Tusk learned. It adapted. It stopped lunging and used its reach to corner Javier, cutting off escape routes. It herded him toward the foundry floor's center, away from the complex machinery, into an open space where skill and environment mattered less than raw physical power. A powerful blow connected. Tusk's talons raked across Javier's chest, tearing through his shirt and slicing deep into the flesh. Javier cried out, stumbling back, the pry bar falling from his grasp with a loud clang. He tripped over a coil of cable and fell hard onto his back. Tusk was on him in an instant, a mountain of alien muscle and fury. Pinned Javier to the floor, one massive hand crushing his arm and the other holding his throat. The harrow lowered its head, its smooth faceplate split open, revealing a maw of metallic needle-sharp teeth that snapped inches from Javier's face. A low, triumphant growl vibrated through the predator's chest. Pinned beneath the harrow's crushing weight, the creature's scent of charged air and burnt protein filling his nostrils, Javier felt his consciousness fading. The pain in his chest flared into a blinding point of light. Its maw snapped again, spittle hitting his cheek. This was the end. But as his vision narrowed, his free hand, flailing at his side, brushed against something hard and smooth on the floor. He closed his fingers around it. A shard of broken ceramic, a piece of high-temperature insulator that had shattered from one of the old forge housings. The shard was heavy with a razor-sharp edge. A desperate weapon, but the only one he had. Tusk leaned in for the killing bite. In that moment, Javier saw his chance. On the harrow's damaged shoulder where the container had struck it, the impact had torn away a section of its armored skin. A cluster of exposed wiring and biocircuitry sparked in the rain, the internal workings of his damaged technology. With a final surge of strength, Javier jammed the ceramic shard into that mess of exposed wiring. He twisted it, digging it deep into the sensitive electronics. A massive electrical charge diverted from its intended path surged into Harrow's own nervous system. Tusk's entire side went rigid. A piercing, inhuman shriek of agony and shock tore from its throat as the arm pinning Javier went limp, its eternal mechanism smoking and fused. Its body convulsed, distracted by the ruin of its own systems. It was his only opening. Javier gasped for air, his lungs burning. He pushed himself to his hands and knees, blood pouring from the deep gashes on his chest. He saw its twitching form, then the massive conveyor belt just a few feet away, a wide, steel-plated track that led directly into the primary forge's gaping maw. He staggered to his feet. He grabbed the fallen pry bar. Using a nearby stanchion as a fulcrum, he jammed the bar's end under the predator's thrashing body. Tusk roared, its good arm flailing, talons gouging the air inches from Javier's face. It was like trying to move a mountain caught in an earthquake. His wounds screamed, his muscles tore. With a final agonized roar, he threw his entire weight onto the bar. The harrow's body shifted, its struggles becoming leverage against itself, sliding with a sickening scrape of metal on metal onto the conveyor belt. Javier stumbled to the emergency activation panel on the wall, a single, grime-covered, blood-red button. He slammed his palm against it. With a low groan of ancient machinery coming back to life, the conveyor belt lurched into motion. It carried the twitching, paralyzed form of the galaxy's apex predator toward the forge's fire. Tusk's single optic, the only part of it still moving, locked with Javier's. He saw, understanding in the optic's glow, the look of a fellow predator who had been out-hunted. The harrow disappeared into the forge's darkness. A silent, intense flash of white-hot erupted from the depths, a brief incineration, and then stillness. The adrenaline faded, replaced by overwhelming pain. Javier stood swaying in the rain, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He saw a strange organic metal device on the floor where Tusk had fallen. The comm unit, still intact. He picked it up. The device felt warm in his hand. He examined it. A single, pulsing glyph glowed on its surface. A status request. He pressed his thumb to the glyph, and channel opened with a crackle of static, and a series of alien clicks and sharp hisses emanated from the comm unit. A voice from the other end, demanding a report. Javier held the device up to his mouth. Rain and blood dripped from his chin, mingling on the floor. He took a breath, and in a slow, steady, exhausted voice, he spoke into the alien static. Your package sustained damage in transit. He paused, the only sound, the rain's drumming. Consider the contract void. He clenched his fist, crushing the comm unit until it was silent scrap. Then he threw the smoking pieces into the forge's fiery mouth, where they melted away. The contract was closed. He turned his back on the fire, the arena, and the part of himself he had been forced to become again. Javier Mendoza took the long, painful walk from the foundry. He leaned back toward the city's neon glow. Back toward Sona's clinic. Back toward his small, quiet workshop with its broken door frame. Wounded, scarred, and haunted, he was still alive. He had fought the galaxy's apex predator, and the one with it himself. And he had won. He disappeared into the rainy night of Tetsuguma, a mechanic with broken things to fix, starting with himself.